Hey, right, a little bit of UK motorcycling news that I thought might interest you today. What is currently up to now the best-selling modern classic motorcycle in the United Kingdom for 2025 so far. But it's not quite as straightforward as it may seem. There are one or two sort of caveats and ifs or buts attached. And the other thing at the end that I'd like to report on is the success of the Hepco and Becker rear rack on the Honda GB350S. It's worked out very well. As a pillion grab rail, which is, if you remember, why I installed it in the first place. Now, the launch of any new motorcycle in, a geographical area like the UK or Europe or whatever, the first year the sales are always fantastic because, it's something new, bright and shiny, and everybody wants to see what it's all about, so the sales are good. Usually, the true test is the second year and the third year to see whether it keeps that momentum up. Which, of course, like the BSA, we saw really good sales in the first year when it was released. In fact, it outsold the Royal Enfield equivalents for 2023, was it? I'm losing track now. Only to fail miserably last year, 2024. Now, I think some channels here on YouTube have been very unfair to the BSA. I think it's a cracking bike, but unfortunately, they've given it a bad name through their constant whinging and complaining about it on, various videos, which has caused a lot of people to hold off on it. It's not doing as well these days. Granted, BSA did need to up the quality control a little bit. I believe they've sorted that out now. My BSA is certainly Paula's favourite. She considers it to be a more luxurious and comfortable ride as a pillion than any other bike that I have, which is high praise indeed from Paula. She's fickle at the best of times. Now, I'm not going to keep you in suspense. It's been officially recorded that so far this year, 2025, the Honda GB350S is UK's best-selling modern classic motorcycle. And I have been receiving snippets of information, although I should say I can't confirm them, they're just snippets, that it's a similar story around Europe. One figure that was thrown at me last week was that so far this year they've sold 1,500 of these in Italy alone. Now, of course, sales figures for all motorcycles are much lower in the UK compared to Europe, with around 450 units of the GB350S being sold here in Blighty. Now, to put that into perspective by comparison, Royal Enfield across their entire range of motorcycles have sold around 650, but that includes all models from the 350s, the 450s, and of course the 650 models, with their best-selling 350 being the Meteor, which falls well behind the GB350S. Now, if you remember, I reviewed the GB350S back in May, I think it was, and it immediately jumped out at me as being an outstanding 350cc bike. It's got the looks, although they may not be to everyone's taste, but what it really does have is an outstanding level of engineering, fit, finish and quality. My personal view as an independent reviewer, you know that I am a Royal Enfield fan, is that it runs rings around all of Royal Enfield's 350s in every way. And priced at just under £4,000, it's a very attractive proposition, although that's not always all there is to it where motorcycles are concerned, granted. I've always said that motorcycles are 90% emotion and only 10% common sense. So although the GB350S has got off to a cracking start, there's no guarantees that is going to continue. The first major stumbling block that we come across with this bike is availability. Now, I think it's fair to say that this bike, the sales of this bike, caught Honda by surprise. Obviously, they'd allocated a certain number of units to each country across Europe and here in the UK, and they sold the year's production in about 3 months. That the main stock had gone by the end of March. Now, I think Honda did their best to try and meet demand, but eventually they were defeated. Obviously, they've got a huge range of motorcycles that they're selling around the world, and it just wasn't possible to get the production levels of this bike up to where they needed it to be to keep it available throughout the year. And that's why I think they might lose this top slot in the UK market, because they literally have no models available for sale until December of this year, with those bikes likely not to be delivered until January next year. And from what I can gather, there's quite a waiting list accumulating. Now, I predicted several years ago that the 350cc category of motorcycling across Europe and the UK was going to be a growing sector. It's going to become more and more popular. It's sort of appeared from nowhere, really. 350s went out of fashion 30, 40 years ago, as everyone sort of focused their attentions on high performance, large capacity, expensive bikes, and that's where, to a large extent, across Europe and the UK and the United States, where Honda's attention has been for the last few decades. But as I've been pointing out over the last few years, the focus for riders has been changing over the last 3 or 4 years. I think Royal Enfield has proven that there is a market in those geographical areas for 350cc bikes. And Honda, I think, has only come into the UK and European market reluctantly because they were forced to. Reading between the lines, it looks to me like they've just dipped the toes in these markets with the GB350S. They weren't entirely convinced it was going to be successful. So they didn't allocate as many units as it turned out in the end they actually needed. But if the GB350S is to hold that top spot, there's another fly in the ointment, and that's Royal Enfield. Now, for me personally, things with Royal Enfield haven't been adding up over the last few months. There was something amiss. I couldn't put my finger on what it was. They released a press release saying that they'd sold a record number of motorcycles from 2024. About 1,014,000, I think the figure was. Certainly a number round about there. Yet at the beginning of this year, when I published a video about the top 10 biggest motorcycle manufacturers in the world, although Royal Enfield was on that list at number 10, they'd lost one place from the previous year, the figures were just under 1 million. And these were the official international motorcycle industry figures. Now, Royal Enfield boasted, sort of outstanding figures for December 2024, which seemed a little bit odd to me because, internationally, it's not the best month for selling motorcycles. And it seems to be those December sales that Royal Enfield announced which have created the discrepancy between the industry figures and Royal Enfield's figures. And I've discovered that what actually went on, and I suspected this anyway, is that Royal Enfield pre-registered an enormous amount of motorcycles. You know, going by the discrepancy in the figures, I would say somewhere between 10 and 20,000 units. Now, the only publication I can find that tackles this is Bennett's Bike Social, and they give the reasons for these pre-registrations. What they're basically doing is they're pre-registering motorcycles as being registered to a keeper, even though actually they haven't been sold, they're still in storage somewhere. Bennett's quoted that the reason for these pre-registrations was that the Euro 5 Plus regulations came into force on the 1st of January this year, so they needed to pre-register these motorcycles and then sell them as second-hand this year. But that doesn't make sense because my understanding, unless it's been revoked in some way, was that all motorcycle manufacturers had until the end of 2025 to sell non-compliant motorcycles. They effectively had a 1-year amnesty, so there was no reason to pre-register all those bikes. And indeed, looking back at the increments in the Euro emission standards over the years, it's always been the norm. There's always been an amnesty that's allowed manufacturers to clear old stock that is non-compliant with the new emissions regulations going into the year of the new emissions regulations. So I really don't understand why Royal Enfield felt it was necessary to do that. Those amnesties have always existed. In fact, at the beginning of this year, there was talk about it being extended into 2026 because 2024 was a particularly bad year for motorcycle sales. So there was more than the usual amount of residual stocks on the showroom floors. And just to prove a point on that argument, my Continental GT 650 that I bought some years ago, the Euro 5 emissions had come out in the January. I bought that bike, which was Euro 4, brand new, in June after the new regulations had come in. So, that amnesty has always existed. Now, this has helped Honda along this year because obviously the first 2 months of 2025, Royal Enfield were busy trying to clear that stock of pre-registered motorcycles, so their new sales were very low, effectively giving the Honda a 2-month head start. So I think it's likely that someone is going to overtake the Honda GB350S at some stage this year. Whether it'll be Royal Enfield or not, it remains to be seen. Because I'm saddened to say I'm becoming less trusting of their press releases about sales at the moment. I think it's been pointed out to me over the last couple of weeks that, again, a Royal Enfield press release to the legacy press that sales are up 23% from last year, but then last year was a really bad year, and of course there's these pre-registrations that all come into the mix, so I really don't know what that amounts to in the greater scheme of things. Nothing much is making sense from Royal Enfield at the moment. So, finally, moving on to this Hepco and Becker rear rack stroke passenger grab rail on the Honda GB350S. As I've previously pointed out, Honda made a major faux pas by not putting a proper passenger grab rail on the 350. It comes with it as standard in other territories, not here in the UK, and I believe across Europe they don't have them. They just have one of those little pillion straps, which isn't ideal. Now, Paula did express her reservations about this on the press bike that I had back in May. She didn't like it at all, although generally speaking she found the rest of the bike okay from a pillion's point of view. And the solution that most owners of these bikes seem to have produced is to fit a Hepco and Becker rear rack. Not cheap, but it's very high quality, and the design does lend itself well to pillion use. Now, I didn't get a chance to take Paula out on the back of the GB350 until this weekend just gone. 2 reasons. One, this is a small capacity motorcycle and it was still going through its running procedure, and I always think with a small bike it's best not to carry a pillion until you've gone through at least the first part of your braking procedure, just to give the engine an easy time and not overstress it. And the other reason is that we got hit with thunderstorms the weekend after I fitted it, so Paula wasn't really up for going out and getting soaking wet on a bike. So we went out on Sunday, we had a few errands to do. Paula absolutely loved it. What she does like about this is because it's a little bit lower down than a normal passenger grab rail. Obviously they normally come up to sort of the small of the pillion passenger's back. So I thought the low height might be an issue. She didn't find that to be the case, but what she did like is that you've got more positions to hold on to with this rack. In Harewards, you know, with a pillion grab rail, usually you've only got sort of one spot on either side where you can grip it, but this particular rack gives you multiple points for her to hold on to and sort of change position when she needs a rest and she's getting a bit fatigued. She finds this far better than a standard grab rail. Now, I have to admit, I was a little bit concerned about the width of this rack. You know, compared to the anatomy of your average lady, you've got quite a narrow seat pad on the back of this bike, and I thought a pillion could well end up sitting on the bars of this particular rack. A lot of other people expressed concerns exactly the same. It's not a problem. It isn't an issue at all. The side rails on this rack do not interfere with the pillion seating position. So, if you own one of these bikes and you're looking for a solution to pillion security and safety, you could do worse than this particular rack from Hepco and Becker. And if you're in the market for a new bike but you're dithering over the GB350 because of this issue with the grab rail, this rack is a very practical solution to that problem. And it's approved by Paula, which is high praise indeed. Obviously, it remains to be seen where the Honda GB350S goes from here. You know, they have no stock this year now until December. They're likely to be delivered in January, and if you ain't got bikes, you can't sell them. However, scarcity often drives demand. So, you know, one of two things are going to happen. People are going to lose interest, and next year the Honda is old news and nobody's particularly bothered about it. Or that scarcity in the second half of this year is really going to drive demand, and we'll see some stellar sales from this bike next year, perhaps taking the top spot for the entire year if you know, Honda manages to produce enough bikes to cover the market and to cover demand. We'll see how it goes. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and consider subscribing to this channel if you're not already a subscriber. It does help me out. There are other ways you can help me out via PayPal donations or via my Patreon page. Details of those are in the video description down below, or you could just use the super thanks button, which is below the picture that you're watching now. I am of course going to be back on Friday, so until then please ride safely and I'll see you soon.